word jinn comes from an Arabic root meaning to conceal. The English word genie is from the Arabic root. Sapient creatures created of smokeless fire, the jinn share free will with humans and thus the capacity for goodness and evil. Iblis, often mistaken to be a fallen angel, belongs to the jinn species. He became the adversary to humanity after Adam's creation and expulsion from the Garden of Eden. According to Fakhruddin al-Razi, the jinn inhabited the earth before humans and created great disruption and violence, shedding blood, sowing corruption. Iblis was sent down from the divine prince to subdue them, and then upon his return to the highest assembly, he found that Allah had chosen a new vicegerent named Adam to be placed on earth. So he was actually very proud of what he'd done, because he'd come down to earth, he'd subdued all of the rebellion, and then he was very proud he was getting replaced. So it's kind of like these managers who do all this work, and they brought the company around, and then the board fires them and brings in the new hotshot manager, and they go crazy. So he basically just refused to bow down, and then he blames God. When the angels saw this, they were actually making a qiyas, which is why they said, without knowledge of what Adam was going to do, they knew that he had free will, and so they asked, are you putting another group that are going to do the same thing this previous group did, sow corruption and murder and do all these things? And Allah said, I know what you don't know. And then he said to Adam, tell them the names. And when the angels saw that Adam had been given this knowledge that they didn't have, then they recognized his superiority. So Iblis refused to do that. And so the jinn have a natural animosity generally towards people. Now if you look in most cultures, there is a jinn mythology. Almost every culture on the planet has some sense of, if you look, especially Aboriginal people, they're very much connected to that. I lived in the Sahara, and jinn tend to inhabit desert areas, and there are many, many stories that I heard from people that I trust of their own experience with jinn in the desert and things. So I think that there are people that have had experiences. We tend to ignore a lot of these things that happen to people, like alien abduction. Alien abduction is classic jinn stuff, because the jinn do yukhtataf. People get taken by jinn, and they do things to them. And so these type stories, and you have a lot of people that have had these experiences all over the world of these type things. So Allahu Alam, I don't know, but it's definitely consistent with what they say in tafsir and things. That in fact Abqar, which is their capital, Khurafa, the Prophet in Arabic, superstition is khurafa. Khurafat are superstitious beliefs. But the Prophet once asked Aisha if she knew who Khurafa was, and she said no, and he said Khurafa was a man who was kidnapped by the jinn, so it was like alien abduction. He was kidnapped by the jinn, taken to Abqar, and he saw all these wondrous things that happened with them. And then when he came back, he told people about it, and they laughed at him and said that it was ridiculous and absurd. And so that became hadithu khurafa. Like, that's just khurafa talk. In other words, it's superstition. So the jinn, people don't believe in them, that's fine. Not believing in something doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. There's a lot of people don't believe in God. So, yeah, I read about that, and I think a lot of it is definitely exaggerated. Commercial airlines, there's never been an accident in the Bermuda Triangle in the history of commercial airlining. So, Allahu Alam. There is a weird thing that all the sea snakes migrate down there, which is strange. But, I don't, there's a lot of things on the planet that are just weird. There are very strange things on the planet. I've had a couple of very strange experiences. I had an experience in the desert that was very strange, and I had experience in a New York subway with another person who's a friend of mine who's an eyewitness to this. And it's kind of Ripley's Believe It or Not, but I did have that experience. I'm sure some of you have had strange experiences. Other people, maybe they haven't. Some people just deny their own, what they're seeing, because they just, they don't have a way of assimilating what's happening to them. So, the jinn, we believe in them. It's in the Quran. You can't deny them. They're creatures, and they're around. They don't live generally with us. They tend to live in isolated areas, like somewhere like Greenland or Sahara Desert, places, big open places. They like big open places, and that's where they tend to live. So, but there are jinn that do move amongst people as well. And you have all this weird stuff. There's so much weird stuff out there, and there's a lot of people that believe weird things. A lot of Muslims get very obsessed with the jinn, and I think that's a dangerous thing to do. We know they exist. The Quran asserts their existence. They certainly do explain a lot of the weird stuff that goes on in the world that is kind of inexplicable, and I think that's why most cultures did have some type of reference to poltergeists or to the little people or whatever they were. There's a lot of terms for them. Yeah, generally my understanding is that they have suggestion. Their power is the power of suggestion. But there's definitely, I'm going to tell you a true story. I'm not making this up, because this happened to me. When I worked with a physician, Hashim Sidat, he lives in Australia now for the Australian people, so they'll confirm this. I had an eyewitness to this. But I worked with him in his office. He was a physician, and there was a man who came in, and he seemed perfectly normal guy, but he was convinced that his wife was having a relationship with some invisible creature. And he told us these stories, and you could write him off as crazy, but he did not seem crazy to me at all. And he would wake up in the middle of the night, and there was something happening, and he just felt the presence. And now, that same physician, we had another lady who was actually told us she was having a relationship with an unseen, and the reason she came is that he would come to her in the night, and they would have physical intimacy, and she would have this huge rash when that would happen. That's why she was coming. But she told us in all, that was her story. So that's consistent with what's in the books that people do. And there's books at Borders and Barnes & Noble. You can go to these bookstores about how to have relations with spirits, how to invoke them, how to come, and what they'll come, and what you'll feel, and what you'll experience. I'm not making this stuff up. So there's people out there teaching people how to do that. Now, the ulama differ about whether or not they do agree that jinn can have intimacy with humans, but whether or not there's an offspring, Imam Malik did not accept that. Imam Shafi'i did. Imam Malik just thought, even from Bab Sadd al-Daraya, that it would open up a big door of fasad, because they could claim they were married to jinn and things like that. But there's definitely relationships, but again, a lot of the things that we're given in Islam are to protect us from jinn. There's no doubt about that. And one of the most important protections from jinn is cleanliness, hygiene. And so there's definitely a relationship between feces. One of the things when you go into the bathroom, Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min al-khubthi wal-khaba'ith, to seek refuge from the khabitha and the khabith, right, which are the male and female jinn. So that's something that you actually seek refuge in when you go in. One of the reasons why you cover your head also is, even in the Jewish, they cover that small part, because that's actually considered the part that needs the protection, is where the swirl on your, just to keep from, it's in fact, the word in Arabic to be without a hat is hasir al-ras, which also means to be unarmed. And most religious traditions have a very strong encouragement for people to cover their heads, male and female. So males are encouraged. It's not an obligation, but they're encouraged to wear something on their head. Historically, people have always covered their heads. Even the sun, just from that aspect of it. But there is a protection in keeping the head covered. There's a protection in keeping yourself clean. Feces, a lot of crime scenes and things like that, people when they go to these psychopaths to their homes and stuff, they're filthy. They're covered and often feces and urine, and so there's definitely a relationship between that mental illness and the jinn. And obviously people get opened up to unseen worlds. I mean, I mentioned a book by Van Doren called The Presence of Unseen Worlds. He worked for several years, couple decades at Sonoma Napa State Mental Institution, and I read that book from cover to cover. He began it by just arguing that he was a complete materialist when he went into psychiatry, but by the end of working with these, he became very convinced that there really are creatures, and he said some of them were benign and some of them were malevolent. And he said it was very clear to them that auditory hallucinations, he said some of it was mental illness. It was just problems in the brain, but he felt others were clearly real, that the people were not making it up, that they were really hearing things that were actually there. So, Allahu Alam, I mean, in the end of the day, Allahu Alam, all I know is that we believe in Jinn, and Jinn are unseen creatures. In terms of how that plays out in the real world, I'm in the same boat that you are. Like I said, there's a lot of weird things out there. There's a lot of people that believe weird things. I think a lot of it is, explainable. I would argue that if you have people with mental illness, I would go to try to treat it medically before I'd go to an exorcist or something like that, because a lot of hallucinations can be stopped by certain drugs that are very effective at doing it. So, and people that have mental illnesses, now we can treat a lot of those illnesses with drugs. On the other hand, I think some mental illnesses definitely, there's something more going than meets the eye, and Allah knows best. I mean, I'll give you an example. I know somebody who they were having a lot of problems in their house with noises, and their daughter was getting very troubled. I gave him some du'as to do about just getting Jinn out of the house and things like that. And he came back to me a couple months later, and he said that it's completely gone. His daughter was fine, everything complete after he started doing those du'as. So Jinn will respond to dhikr. There's Udma's father. She's going to kill me for bringing this up. But her father was in Los Angeles, and he heard some noise, and he just ignored it. But then in the morning, he found a giant boa constrictor in his house, and he said, "Warabbi Sulaiman, ukhruj, like by the Lord of Sulaiman, get out of here." So he was like commanding him if he was a jinn, because the Prophet ﷺ mentioned if you find snakes, because Jinn can shapeshift, and they tend to take they take cats and dogs and snakes and they can take different animal forms, and that's how you'll see them. If you see them, you won't see them in their form, but they can go into other forms. And so he just said, by the Lord of Sulaiman, leave, but he didn't leave, which means he wasn't a jinn. If it was a jinn, they'll leave. So the Prophet ﷺ said, if you come into your house and there's a snake, you should ask them to leave. Don't just kill it. Just ask it to leave, because he said it might be one of the believing jinn. And if they leave, they'll leave. And just let them leave. And if they don't and they're harmful, then you can kill them. You have permission to kill them. So, Majnun. Yeah, well, Majnun is also, it means the hidden illness. Because you don't really know a person's crazy until sometimes you do. I had some people a while back brought somebody over to my house that was stark raving mad, and I was really upset about it. And that person ended up, doing a really heinous crime. So, but some people you can just see it. You don't need to look very far. And madness, may Allah preserve all of us, because madness is real. And, historically Muslims had a lot of benign madness. They had a lot of jadab as well, what are called majdoubs. Like you're in Morocco. Have you met any majdoubs? See, when I first went to Morocco, there were a lot of majdoubs. Now there's more mad people. Because Muslims used to have majadib more than majaneen. The majdoub is somebody who is mad, but they're mad in a very religious sense. Like, they're very devotional people, and people leave them alone, And in Morocco there were quite a few when I first went to Morocco. They're very interesting. You don't want to spend too much time with them because there's a lot very powerful people. Mad people have very strong presence. It's very dark, and you don't want to get into that. People that work with mad people, if you've worked in, it's a very taxing job. It's a very hard job to be around mad people. Even being around neurotic people, people that aren't well. And in our culture, in our planet today, most people aren't well. There's a lot of imbalance on the planet, just humans. They're not well. They're not doing well. The human project is not going well. So there's a lot of problems with people. And there's a lot of good people out there, but there are a lot of people that are really suffering. There's a lot of suffering out there. And, so there's a lot of mental illness. There's a lot of instability. The Prophet ﷺ said that one of the signs of the end time was takthar al-hawsat, that you'll see a lot of mental instability. Sheikh Habib Ahmed Mashhour told us that the treatment for that is to do dhikr, but to do balancing dhikrs. Certain dhikrs are dangerous for people. Dhikr is like medicine. There's over-the-counter, and then there's prescription medicine. And not all dhikrs, people can go mad doing dhikr. They really can. Their spiritual psychosis is very real. And I've seen it happen to people. If you start doing a lot of divine names, you can really hurt yourself. But things that will not hurt you are prayer on the Prophet ﷺ. You can do that as much as you want, and it will just benefit you. It will not harm you. Istighfar will not harm you. La ilaha illallah is, if you do a lot of it, you can get some pretty intense experiences, but it's not harmful. But if you do certain divine names, they can be very dangerous to do on your own. That's why the religion's about balance. The Prophet did not like excess, even in the religion. He did not like people to do too much, because you can really lose your balance in doing too much devotional practice. You don't want to do too little. You want to find that balance. And that balance depends on you also. It depends on your environment. To do a lot of dhikr in southern Morocco is not a real problem. If you start doing a lot of dhikr in southern Chicago, you might get into some serious trouble. Because of the types of environments that you're living in. One culture supports your dhikr and the other is actually antagonistic to it. So it can create the kind of cognitive dissonance that really can be problematic for people.